The baby was due on Christmas Day. Emily Brown had already picked out the name, decorated the nursery, and was counting down her final weeks of work at St. Mary's Hospital. But on a cold October night in 2007, both Emily and her unborn child disappeared from the maternity ward she knew like the back of her hand. Before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this one. What renovation workers discovered 12 years later would prove that some secrets refuse to stay buried. Emily Brown was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel better just by being there. At 28 years old, she had worked at St. Mary's Hospital for 6 years, climbing from a junior position to head nurse of the maternity ward. Patients loved her gentle touch and encouraging smile. Colleagues admired her dedication and expertise. She was the nurse you wanted holding your hand during labor, the one who remembered your birthday, who stayed late to comfort a grieving family. Her husband, Mark, often joked that Emily cared more about her patients than herself. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he'd tell her as she rubbed her growing belly each morning before leaving for work. "You've had enough practice taking care of everyone else's babies." Emily would laugh and kiss him goodbye, promising to take it easy during her shift. But taking it easy wasn't in Emily's nature. Even at 7 months pregnant, she moved through the hospital corridors with purpose, checking on patients, mentoring newer nurses, ensuring everything ran smoothly on her watch. October 15th, 2007 started like any other day. Emily arrived at St. Mary's at 10:30 p.m. for her night shift, 30 minutes early as always. She stopped by the break room to chat with the evening nurses about patient updates, then made her rounds, introducing herself to the women who would be delivering that night. "Mrs. Rodriguez in room 302 is having her 4th baby," Emily told the incoming night staff during their brief handover meeting. "She's progressing nicely, probably another 3 hours. Mrs. Kim in 318 is a first-time mum, still early labor but getting nervous. And we have 2 scheduled C-sections coming in. Around 2 a.m. Everything was routine, everything was normal." Emily settled into what should have been just another night at the hospital, where she'd spent thousands of hours caring for others. But normal was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Security footage from that night tells a story that investigators would replay hundreds of times over the next 12 years. At 11:47 p.m., Emily's keycard activated the electronic lock to the maternity ward. The cameras captured her familiar silhouette, the slight waddle of pregnancy, her favorite purple scrubs, the ponytail she always wore during night shifts. She waved to Janet Morrison, the security guard making her rounds, and disappeared around the corner toward the nurses' station. That wave would be the last time anyone saw Emily Brown alive. Janet Morrison had worked security at St. Mary's for 15 years. She knew every nurse, every doctor, every cleaning person who walked those halls after dark. Emily was one of her favorites, always stopping to ask about Janet's grandchildren, bringing her homemade cookies during the holidays. Emily seemed completely normal that night, Janet would later tell investigators. Happy, actually. She was excited about the baby, kept talking about how this would be one of her last night shifts before maternity leave. She showed me the latest ultrasound picture she kept in her pocket. At 12:15 a.m., Janet made another pass through the maternity ward. The nurse's station was empty, but that wasn't unusual. Emily often made extended rounds, spending extra time with laboring mothers. Janet didn't think anything of it. At 1:30 a.m., Dr. Patricia Wells arrived for the scheduled C-sections. She found the nurse's station still empty and called out for Emily. No response. She checked the patient rooms. Mrs. Rodriguez was sleeping. Between contractions, Mrs. Kim was pacing her room with her husband. No sign of Emily. "I figured she might be in the supply room or taking a break," Dr. Wells would later recall. "But when I couldn't find her anywhere, I started to worry." Emily never abandoned her post, never. By 2 a.m., concern had turned to alarm. Dr. Wells called security, then the charge nurse, then the hospital administrator. They searched every floor, every room, every closet. They checked the parking garage. Emily's blue Honda Civic sat exactly where she'd parked it, doors locked, purse still in the trunk. Emily Brown had simply vanished. Detective Sarah Martinez had seen her share of missing person cases, but this one defied explanation from the very beginning. St. Mary's Hospital wasn't some isolated location where people could easily disappear. It was a fortress of modern security, keycard access to every department, cameras covering nearly every angle, security guards patrolling around the clock. Someone doesn't just vanish from a hospital, Detective Martinez told her partner, Detective James Chen, as they reviewed the security footage for the third time. Especially not a 7 months pregnant woman who knows the building like her own home. The initial investigation was thorough and immediate. Hospital security pulled every piece of footage from that night. They interviewed every staff member on duty. They checked Emily's keycard logs, her locker, her recent patients. They even brought in search dogs to sweep the entire hospital. Nothing. Emily's keycard showed no activity after 11:47 p.m. The cameras that should have captured her movements through the ward had mysterious gaps, technical glitches, the IT department. It explained that sometimes happened with the older system. But these glitches had never occurred before, and they wouldn't happen again. Mark Brown arrived at the hospital at 3 a.m., called by Dr. Wells when it became clear that Emily wasn't just taking an extended break. He was a mess, still in his pajamas, hair disheveled, eyes wild with panic. "She's been excited about work all week," he told Detective Martinez, pacing back and forth in the hospital conference room. "She loves those patients, especially the new mothers. She would never just leave them. Something terrible has happened." Mark's alibi was solid. He'd been home asleep, confirmed by neighbors who saw him taking out the trash around 11 p.m. and heard him watching television until after midnight. Besides, everyone who knew the couple described them as deeply in love, excitedly preparing for their first child. Emily talked about the baby constantly. Her best friend and fellow nurse Lisa Park told investigators. She had names picked out, nursery colours chosen, a birth plan written down to the minute. She was supposed to work until November 1st, then take maternity leave. She was so careful about everything, especially lately. No way she'd put herself or the baby in danger. But if Emily hadn't left voluntarily, where was she? As hours turned to days, the search for Emily Brown expanded beyond the hospital walls. Police interviewed every person who'd been in the building that night. Patients, family members, maintenance staff, even the delivery drivers who'd brought supplies to the hospital. They found nothing suspicious. No strange visitors, no unusual behavior, no conflicts or threats involving Emily. She was universally liked, professionally respected, and personally happy. The media picked up the story quickly. Pregnant nurse vanishes from hospital dominated local news for weeks. Emily's picture, smiling in her purple scrubs, hand resting on her pregnant belly, appeared on every channel, every newspaper, every missing person website. Tips poured in from across the state. Someone thought they'd seen Emily at a gas station 50 miles away. Another caller reported a pregnant woman matching her description at a bus station. Every lead was investigated. Every sighting was checked. None led anywhere. Detective Martinez coordinated with hospitals across 3 states, checking if any Jane Does matched Emily's description. She contacted airports, train stations, and bus terminals. She even reached out to Emily's family in California, thinking perhaps some crisis had prompted an unexpected trip home. Nothing. Emily Brown had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. The hardest part was Mark, Detective Martinez, would later remember. He came to the station every day for the first month, then every week, then every month, always asking if we'd found anything new, always hoping. That man aged 10 years in the first 6 months after Emily disappeared. As winter turned to spring, then summer, the active investigation began to wind down. Emily's case remained open, but with no new leads and no evidence of foul play, it joined the stack of cold cases that haunted every police department. Emily's due date came and went. December 25th, 2007, Christmas Day, when she should have been holding her newborn baby, became instead another painful reminder of what had been lost. Mark Brown tried to keep Emily's memory alive. He maintained her garden, kept her clothes in the closet, left her side of the bed untouched. He attended every police briefing, followed up on every tip, hired a private investigator with money from Emily's life insurance policy. The private investigator, a former police detective named Robert Hayes, spent 6 months retracing the official investigation. He interviewed hospital staff again, analyzed the security footage with new technology, even brought in a psychic that Mark had read about online. I wanted to find something the police missed, Hayes admitted years later. But honestly, they did everything right. The case file was thorough. The investigation was professional. Emily Brown didn't leave that hospital voluntarily, but she didn't leave any trace of where she went either. The hospital implemented new security measures in Emily's honor. More cameras, better lighting, additional security guards during night shifts. The Emily Brown Memorial Fund provided scholarships for nursing students and support for families of missing persons, but Emily herself remained gone. Mark eventually sought grief counseling, tried to rebuild his life, even went on a few dates that well-meaning friends arranged, but he never stopped looking for Emily. Her missing person poster remained taped to his bathroom mirror, a daily reminder that somewhere, somehow, there might still be answers. Years passed. The case grew colder. Detective Martinez retired, passing Emily's file to Detective Rodriguez. Then Detective Rodriguez transferred to another department, and Detective Williams inherited the case. Each detective reviewed the file, looked for new angles, but found the same dead ends. St. Mary's Hospital expanded, adding new wings and renovating old ones. Staff turnover meant fewer and fewer people remembered Emily Brown personally, though her name remained on the memorial plaque in the main lobby. Lisa Park, Emily's best friend, left nursing altogether, unable to work in hospitals after Emily's disappearance. Dr. Wells transferred to another hospital. Janet Morrison, the security guard, retired early, haunted by the thought that she might have prevented whatever happened to Emily if she just made one more pass through the maternity ward that night. Life moved on, as life always does. But Emily's disappearance left a scar on everyone who knew her, a question mark that could never be erased. 12 years later, St. Mary's Hospital announced a major renovation project. The building had served the community well, but technology had advanced, patient needs had evolved, and the hospital needed to modernize to stay competitive. The renovation would be extensive. New medical equipment, updated patient rooms, expanded surgical suites. But the most significant change would be the complete overhaul of the building's infrastructure. New electrical systems, modern plumbing, updated HVAC, and fiber optic networking throughout. Construction began in February 2019, starting with the oldest sections of the hospital. The maternity ward, where Emily had disappeared, was scheduled for renovation in late spring. The construction crew, led by foreman Tony Castellanos, had worked on dozens of hospital projects. They knew the unique challenges of renovating a functioning medical facility, working around patient care, maintaining sterile environments, minimizing noise and disruption. Hospitals are tricky, Tony explained to his crew during their first week. Lots of hidden infrastructure, unexpected layouts. These old buildings always have surprises. We need to be careful, document everything, and never assume we know what's behind a wall until we actually see it. The surprises started immediately. The electrical system was more complex than the blueprints indicated. The plumbing had been modified multiple times over the decades, creating a maze of pipes and connections. But these were normal construction challenges, the kind Tony's crew had handled countless times before. It wasn't until they reached the maternity ward that they found something that wasn't normal at all. May 15th, 2019, exactly 12 years, and 7 months after Emily Brown's disappearance, construction worker Miguel Santos was renovating the nurses' station in the maternity ward. The plan called for expanding the area, which meant removing a non-load-bearing wall that separated the main desk from a small storage closet. Miguel had been swinging his sledgehammer for about an hour, methodically breaking through the drywall and exposing the wooden frame beneath. It was routine demolition work, the kind he'd done thousands of times over his 15-year construction career. Then his sledgehammer hit something that didn't belong. "Tony!" Miguel called out to his foreman. "You need to see this." Tony Castellanos hurried over, expecting to find another plumbing surprise, or maybe some old electrical work that wasn't on the blueprints. Instead, he found Miguel staring at a hole in the wall, his face pale and confused. "There's something in there," Miguel said quietly. "Something that ain't supposed to be there." Tony grabbed a flashlight and peered through the opening Miguel had created. What he saw made him step back, his heart pounding. Behind the wall, in a space that should have contained nothing but insulation and wooden studs, was a small room. Not a storage area or utility space. This was a deliberate construction, lined with plastic sheeting and containing items that had clearly been placed there intentionally. And among those items was a hospital ID badge bearing the name and photo of Emily Brown. "Stop everything," Tony ordered, his voice shaking. "Nobody touches anything else. Miguel, call 911. Tell them we need police and maybe the medical examiner. Now." Miguel pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands, while Tony continued to stare into the hidden space. After 12 years of questions and investigations and theories, the answer to Emily Brown's disappearance was literally built into the walls of the place where she'd vanished. But as the police would soon discover, Emily's ID badge was just the beginning of what had been hidden behind that wall. Detective Williams arrived at St. Mary's Hospital within 20 minutes of Tony's call. She'd inherited Emily Brown's case file 2 years earlier and had reviewed it countless times, always hoping for a break. Now, standing in the partially demolished maternity ward, she finally had one. "Nobody else goes near that wall," she ordered the construction crew. "This is officially a crime scene." The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, arrived shortly after, followed by the forensics team. What they found behind the wall would rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about Emily Brown's disappearance. The hidden space was approximately 6 feet wide, 4 feet deep, and 7 feet tall, roughly the size of a small closet. But it had been deliberately constructed, not left over from previous renovations. Someone had built this space intentionally, lined it with heavy plastic sheeting, and sealed it behind what appeared to be a normal wall. Inside the space, forensics found Emily's hospital ID badge and keycard still attached to the purple lanyard she'd worn that night. Her car keys, with the small teddy bear keychain Mark had given her when they found out she was pregnant. A hospital gown, size large, with what appeared to be bloodstains. Medical supplies, surgical instruments, IV tubing, gauze and bandages. A small digital camera containing dozens of photos. And most chilling of all, a handwritten journal documenting everything that had happened to Emily Brown during her final hours. Dr. Hoffman worked carefully, photographing every item before removal, maintaining the chain of evidence that would be crucial for any prosecution. But even her professional composure was shaken by what they were uncovering. "Detective," she called softly, "you need to see this." Dr. Hoffman held up a plastic hospital bracelet, the kind given to patients upon admission. It bore Emily's name, but the date was October 16th, 2007, the day after her disappearance. The attending physician listed was Dr. Marcus Webb, someone Detective Williams had never heard of in connection with Emily's case. Dr. Webb wasn't working that night, Detective Williams said, checking her notes. He wasn't even interviewed during the original investigation, but the journal would reveal why. Dr. Marcus Webb hadn't been working an official shift. He'd been at the hospital for an entirely different reason. The handwritten journal found in the hidden room contained 18 pages of meticulous notes, written in a precise clinical hand. It documented Emily Brown's final hours in horrifying detail. Detective Williams read the journal in the hospital conference room, the same room where she'd interviewed Mark Brown dozens of times over the past 2 years. With each page, the mystery of Emily's disappearance transformed into something far more sinister. The journal began, October 15th, 2007, 11:50 p.m. Subject arrived for night shift as predicted. Initial approach successful. Subject trusts easily, which will facilitate the procedure. The writer was Dr. Marcus Webb, a physician who had worked at St. Mary's until 2006, when he'd been quietly asked to resign following complaints about his bedside manner and some questionable decisions regarding patient care. But hospital records showed he'd turned in his access cards and keys when he left. Apparently, he'd kept copies. The journal revealed that Dr. Webb had been planning Emily's abduction for months. He'd studied her schedules, her routines, her habits. He knew she worked night shifts, knew she was pregnant, knew she often stayed late to comfort patients. PM. Subject approached at nurse's station. informed her that Mrs. Rodriguez was experiencing complications and needed immediate attention. Subject followed without suspicion. Mrs. Rodriguez, the patient Emily had mentioned during shift change, had indeed been sleeping peacefully in room 302. But Dr. Webb had led Emily to a different location entirely, the construction area on the 4th floor, where renovations had been temporarily halted due to budget constraints. 12:05 a.m. Subject became suspicious when we passed the elevator to floor 4, administered mild sedative via injection to the shoulder. Subject lost consciousness within minutes. The journal described how Dr. Webb had used his knowledge of the hospital's layout and the ongoing construction to create a temporary medical facility in the abandoned renovation area. He'd been planning this for months, stockpiling supplies, studying Emily's pregnancy, preparing for what he called the procedure. But this wasn't a kidnapping for ransom or a crime of passion. This was something much worse. Dr. Webb's journal revealed the twisted motivation behind Emily's abduction. He had become obsessed with the idea of performing an unauthorized cesarean section, convinced that he could save babies from what he perceived as incompetent mothers and inadequate medical care. Emily wasn't his first target. The journal referenced previous subjects, though their identities weren't immediately clear. Dr. Webb had apparently been perfecting his technique, learning from earlier attempts. 20 a.m. Subject secured in makeshift surgical suite. Vital stable. Pregnancy appears to be progressing normally. Estimated gestational age, 30 weeks. Procedure should be straightforward. The journal's clinical tone made Detective Williams feel sick. Dr. Webb had written about Emily as if she were a laboratory specimen, not a human being with a husband who loved her and a life she'd been excited to live. 4 a.m. Began surgical preparation. Subject regained consciousness briefly and became agitated. Additional sedation required. Note: future subjects should receive continuous IV sedation to prevent awareness during procedure. Emily had woken up. She'd realized what was happening to her. Detective Williams could only imagine the terror Emily must have felt, strapped to a makeshift operating table, watching a madman prepare to cut her baby from her body. 1:15 a.m. Procedure commenced. Initial incision successful. However, subject's blood pressure dropped unexpectedly, complications arising. What Dr. Webb had failed to account for was that performing surgery in a construction zone, without proper equipment or support staff, was incredibly dangerous. He might have been a trained physician, but he wasn't prepared for the complications that can arise during any surgical procedure. 1:45 a.m. Severe hemorrhaging. Unable to control bleeding with available supplies. Subject's vitals becoming critical. Emily was dying, and Dr. Webb was powerless to save her. 2:20 a.m. Subject expired due to blood loss. Unable to save infant due to premature delivery and lack of proper neonatal equipment. Procedure failed. Emily Brown had died on a construction table, alone and terrified, while Dr. Webb's obsession cost her and her unborn child their lives. But the journal didn't end there. Dr. Webb had one more horrifying act to commit. After Emily died, Dr. Webb faced a choice: confess to what he'd done and face murder charges, or find a way to hide the evidence of his crime. He chose the latter, and his knowledge of the hospital's construction schedule gave him the perfect opportunity. AM must dispose of evidence immediately. Construction area provides optimal solution. Wall cavity in maternity ward can be modified to create concealment space. Dr. Webb had spent the next several hours methodically covering up his crime. He cleaned the makeshift surgical area, removed all evidence of the procedure, and transported Emily's body to the maternity ward. 4:30 a.m. Body placement complete. Wall modification in progress. Space will be sealed before morning shift arrival. The hidden room behind the nurse's station hadn't been a storage space or a construction oversight. It had been Emily's tomb, built by the man who killed her. Dr. Webb had used his medical knowledge and his familiarity with the hospital to create the perfect hiding place. He'd known the construction schedule, known that the wall wouldn't be touched again for years. He'd even stolen hospital supplies to line the space, preventing odors that might have led to discovery. Sky. AM. Concealment complete. All evidence secured. Official story will be mysterious disappearance. Investigation will focus on external factors, not internal hospital activities. Dr. Webb had been right. The investigation had focused on where Emily might have gone, not where she might have been hidden. Detectives had searched every room, every floor, every possible exit from the hospital. But they'd never thought to look inside the walls. The journal's final entry was perhaps the most chilling. Procedure was unsuccessful due to inadequate preparation and equipment limitations. Future attempts will require better planning and more controlled environment. Subject selection remains sound. Pregnant hospital employees provide optimal access and minimal suspicion. Dr. Webb hadn't seen Emily's murder as the end of his crimes. He'd seen it as a learning experience for future victims. Detective Williams immediately put out a BOLO alert for Dr. Marcus Webb, though she suspected he might be long gone. 12 years was a long time to disappear, and if he'd been planning these crimes so meticulously, he'd probably planned his escape just as carefully. But sometimes criminals aren't as smart as they think they are. Hospital records showed that Dr. Webb had been 45 years old when he left St. Mary's in 2006, which would make him 58 now. His medical license had been revoked in 2008 after an investigation into patient complaints, though authorities hadn't connected this to Emily's disappearance at the time. Financial records were more revealing. Dr. Webb had maintained a bank account in the city until 2009, 2 years after Emily's murder. His last known address was an apartment complex 20 miles from the hospital, though neighbors there remembered him as a quiet man who kept to himself and moved away suddenly one night. But the real break came from an unexpected source: the digital camera found in the hidden room. The camera contained dozens of photos documenting Dr. Webb's preparations for Emily's murder. Photos of the construction area where he'd performed the surgery. Photos of the supplies he'd stolen from the hospital. Photos of Emily herself, taken while she was unconscious and helpless. But the most important photos were the ones that showed Dr. Webb's face clearly as he prepared for what he called the procedure. These images would be crucial for identification, but they also revealed something else. Dr. Webb had been documenting his crimes because he was proud of them, and proud criminals sometimes can't resist sharing their work. Detective Williams contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, specialists in tracking serial killers and predators. They confirmed her suspicions. Dr. Webb's journal entries and photographic documentation suggested he was planning additional crimes. This wasn't a one-time incident, BAU agent Sarah Caldwell told Detective Williams during their first consultation. This was practice. He'll try again, probably has tried again. We need to check missing person reports for pregnant women near any hospital where he might have worked since 2007. The search expanded nationwide. Hospital employment records, medical licensing boards, missing person databases, everything was cross-referenced with Dr. Webb's name and description, and they found him. Dr. Marcus Webb had been busy in the 12 years since Emily Brown's murder. FBI investigators discovered he'd worked at hospitals in 4 different states since leaving St. Mary's, always using false references and sometimes even false identities. He'd become skilled at creating new credentials, forging recommendations, and talking his way into temporary positions at understaffed medical facilities. And wherever Dr. Webb worked, pregnant women disappeared. Jennifer Martinez, a 26-year-old nursing assistant, vanished from Valley General Hospital in Arizona in 2009. Her car was found in the hospital parking garage, but she was never seen again. Patricia Chang, a 31-year-old lab technician, disappeared from Memorial Medical Center in Colorado in 2011. She'd been 6 months pregnant and planning her maternity leave when she simply didn't come home from work one night. Angela Rodriguez, a 24-year-old respiratory therapist, went missing from City Hospital in New Mexico in 2014. Security footage showed her entering the building for her shift, but she never checked in with her supervisor. 3 more women, 3 more disappearances, 3 more unsolved cases that had haunted their families and frustrated investigators for years. But now, with Dr. Webb's journal and the evidence from Emily's hidden tomb, the pattern was clear. Dr. Webb had been moving from hospital to hospital, perfecting his technique, learning from his mistakes. Emily Brown had been his first victim, but she hadn't been his last. He's gotten better at this, Agent Caldwell explained to the task force that had been assembled to track Dr. Webb. The later disappearances show more planning. better execution. He's learned how to avoid the mistakes he made with Emily Brown. But Dr. Webb had also made one crucial error. He'd kept Emily's camera and journal. Whether it was arrogance, sentimentality, or simple oversight, those documents had given investigators the key to unraveling his entire operation. The manhunt for Dr. Marcus Webb became a federal priority. His photo was circulated to every hospital in the country. His known aliases were shared with law enforcement agencies nationwide. Financial investigators tracked his banking patterns and credit usage. But Dr. Webb had had 12 years to perfect his disappearing act. Finding him wouldn't be easy, unless he made another mistake. The break came from an unexpected source: a small community hospital in rural Oregon, where Dr. Webb had apparently been working under the name Dr. Michael Watson for the past 6 months. A sharp-eyed administrator named Linda Patterson had seen the FBI alert and recognized something familiar about the photo. Dr. Watson looked older, grayer, with a beard that hadn't been there in his old photos. But the eyes were the same, and Linda had always been good with faces. He applied for a temporary position in our emergency department, Linda told FBI. Agents over the phone said he was semi-retired, just wanted to help out small hospitals that were short-staffed. He had excellent references, seemed very knowledgeable, and we needed the help. But Linda had noticed some odd behavior. Dr. Webb showed unusual interest in pregnant patients, always volunteering to handle their cases. He asked detailed questions about their due dates, their home situations, their work schedules. I thought it was just enthusiasm for obstetrics, Linda admitted. But now that I see his photo, those eyes gave me chills. More importantly, Linda reported that the hospital had a pregnant employee, Maria Santos, a 29-year-old nurse who was 7 months along and still working night shifts. Maria matched Dr. Webb's victim profile perfectly, and according to Linda, Dr. Watson had been showing particular interest in Maria's schedule. FBI agents were on a plane to Oregon within hours, but when they arrived at the hospital, they discovered that Dr. Webb had vanished again. His locker was empty, his apartment was cleared out, and Maria Santos hadn't shown up for her shift the night before. The hunt for Dr. Webb had become a race against time to save Maria Santos. Maria Santos's disappearance triggered the largest manhunt in Oregon's history. FBI agents, state police, and local law enforcement flooded the area around the rural hospital. Roadblocks were established, airports were monitored, and every abandoned building within 50 miles was searched. But Dr. Webb had learned from his previous escapes. He'd prepared multiple exit strategies, multiple hiding places. He'd become a ghost, and Maria Santos was running out of time. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Maria's cell phone. Dr. Webb had apparently taken Maria's phone when he abducted her, probably to prevent her from calling for help. But he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd left the phone turned on. FBI technicians were able to track the phone's GPS signal to a remote cabin deep in the Oregon woods, about 60 miles from the hospital. The cabin belonged to a hunting lodge that had been closed for the season, perfect isolation for Dr. Webb's purposes, but also a trap if law enforcement found him there. FBI tactical teams surrounded the cabin at dawn on May 18, 2019. Through thermal imaging, they could see 2 figures inside, one moving around actively, one lying still. Dr. Webb and Maria Santos. "This is the FBI," Agent Caldwell announced through a bullhorn. "Dr. Marcus Webb, we know you're inside. Release Maria Santos and come out with your hands visible." There was no response from the cabin. Agent Caldwell tried again. "Marcus, we've found Emily Brown. We've found the journal, the photographs, the evidence. We know about Jennifer Martinez, Patricia Chang, Angela Rodriguez. It's over. Don't make this worse by hurting Maria." This time, Dr. Webb responded. His voice was calm, almost professorial, as if he were lecturing medical students. "You don't understand the importance of the work," he called out. "These women, these babies, they need proper medical care. The system is failing them." "Then let's talk about it," Agent Caldwell replied. "Come outside, and we'll discuss your research. But first, let Maria go. She needs medical attention." Dr. Webb laughed, a sound that chilled everyone who heard it. "She's receiving the finest medical care available. I've learned so much since that first procedure. Emily Brown taught me valuable lessons about preparation and equipment requirements. Through the thermal imaging, agents could see Dr. Webb moving around what appeared to be a makeshift surgical suite. Maria Santos remained motionless on what looked like an operating table. They were almost out of time. FBI sniper Jake Morrison had the cabin in his crosshairs, waiting for a clear shot at Dr. Webb. But thermal imaging showed that Dr. Webb was staying close to Maria Santos, using her as a human shield. Inside the cabin, Dr. Webb was preparing for what he considered his masterpiece. Over the past 12 years, he'd refined his technique, improved his equipment, learned from the mistakes that had cost Emily Brown her life. "Don't worry, Maria," he said to his unconscious victim. "This time will be different. I have proper surgical equipment, adequate blood supplies, even neonatal care facilities. Your baby will have the best possible chance." Maria Santos had been fighting the sedatives Dr. Webb had given her, drifting in and out of consciousness for the past 18 hours. She'd been awake enough to understand what was happening to her, aware enough to be terrified, but too drugged to fight back effectively. "The previous subjects taught me so much," Dr. Webb continued, arranging his surgical instruments with meticulous care. "Emily showed me the importance of blood pressure monitoring. Jennifer taught me about proper restraint techniques. Patricia demonstrated the need for continuous IV access. Angela revealed the optimal timing for delivery. Each name he mentioned was another woman he'd murdered, another family he'd destroyed in his pursuit of what he considered medical perfection. "You should feel honored, Maria," Dr. Webb said, checking her IV line. "You're going to be part of something historic. The first successful unauthorized cesarean delivery performed under optimal conditions." But Dr. Webb's definition of optimal conditions included performing surgery in a remote cabin, with no backup medical support, no emergency equipment, and no regard for Maria's life beyond her usefulness as an incubator for her unborn child. Outside, FBI agents were finalizing their assault plan. They had to move soon. Dr. Webb was clearly preparing to begin the surgery, and Maria Santos couldn't survive another botched procedure. At exactly 6:30 a.m., FBI tactical teams breached the cabin. From 3 different points simultaneously, smoke grenades created confusion, while agents rushed toward the makeshift surgical area where Dr. Webb held Maria Santos. Dr. Webb had been in the middle of his surgical preparation when the assault began. The sudden noise and smoke disoriented him, but he immediately grabbed a scalpel and held it to Maria's throat. "Stay back!" he screamed, his calm professorial demeanor finally cracking. "You don't understand what you're interrupting. This is medical research." Agent Caldwell entered the cabin with her weapon drawn, but lowered. "Marcus, think about what you're doing. You're a doctor. You took an oath to do no harm." "I am doing no harm," Dr. Webb shouted back. "I'm saving lives." "These babies deserve better than incompetent mothers and inadequate medical facilities." Emily Brown was a trained nurse, Agent Caldwell pointed out. "She would have been an excellent mother. You took that choice away from her." For a moment, something flickered in Dr. Webb's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a brief moment of sanity breaking through his delusions. Emily was different," he said, his voice wavering. "She fought too hard. She knew the importance of the procedure." "Because the procedure was murder, Marcus," Agent Caldwell said firmly. "Emily Brown died because you cut her open in a construction zone without proper equipment or training. You killed her and her baby." The scalpel in Dr. Webb's hand trembled. Behind his delusions, some part of him knew Agent Caldwell was right. Emily Brown had died because of his arrogance, his obsession, his complete disregard for human life. "The work must continue," he whispered, but his voice had lost its conviction. "No, Marcus," Agent Caldwell said gently. "The work ends here. Put down the scalpel and let us help Maria." Dr. Webb looked down at Maria Santos, unconscious and helpless on his makeshift operating table. For 12 years, he'd told himself he was saving lives. But looking at Maria now, he saw Emily Brown, he saw Jennifer Martinez, he saw Patricia Chang and Angela Rodriguez, and all the women whose lives he'd stolen in pursuit of his twisted vision of medical perfection. The scalpel clattered to the floor. FBI agents immediately rushed forward, securing Dr. Webb while paramedics attended to Maria Santos. She was unconscious but alive, her vital signs stable. The baby's heartbeat was strong and regular. "Get her to the nearest hospital immediately," the lead paramedic ordered. "She's dehydrated and shows signs of drug interaction, but both mother and baby should be fine." Dr. Marcus Webb was taken into custody without further resistance. As agents led him away in handcuffs, he kept muttering about his research, his procedures, his important work. Even in defeat, he couldn't acknowledge the reality of what he'd done. But for the families of his victims, his capture finally brought the answers they'd been seeking for over a decade. Maria Santos recovered fully from her ordeal. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl 3 weeks later, surrounded by her family and protected by FBI security. Dr. Webb's final victim had become his last failure. Mark Brown finally had answers about what happened to Emily. After 12 years of wondering, of hoping, of investigating every possible lead, he learned that his wife had never left the hospital where she worked. She'd been murdered by a madman and hidden behind the walls of the place she'd loved. "I always knew Emily wouldn't have left voluntarily," Mark told reporters after Dr. Webb's arrest. "She loved her job, loved her patients, loved our baby." Knowing what really happened, it's horrible, but it's better than not knowing. Emily's remains were recovered from the hidden room behind the maternity ward wall. After 12 years, she was finally laid to rest in the cemetery plot Mark had been maintaining, next to a small headstone he'd placed for their unborn child. The other families got closure too. FBI investigators, armed with Dr. Webb's detailed journals and photographic evidence, were able to locate the remains of Jennifer Martinez, Patricia Chang, and Angela Rodriguez. Each had been hidden in locations similar to Emily's tomb, spaces Dr. Webb had constructed within the hospitals where he'd worked. Dr. Webb had documented everything obsessively, treating his murders like medical case studies. His journals contained detailed descriptions of each victim's abduction, surgery, and disposal. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial of Dr. Marcus Webb became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in recent memory. Families of the victims packed the courtroom each day, finally getting to hear the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Dr. Webb's defense team tried to argue that he was mentally ill, that his delusions about saving babies had driven him to commit acts he didn't understand were wrong. But the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, painted a different picture. This defendant wasn't insane, Ada Walsh told the jury during her opening statement. He was methodical, calculating, and completely aware of what he was doing. His journals show detailed planning, careful preparation, and conscious efforts to avoid detection. These weren't the actions of a madman. They were the actions of a predator. The evidence was devastating. Dr. Webb's own journals, photographs, and meticulous documentation of his crimes provided a complete picture of his 12-year killing spree. Testimony from hospital staff revealed how he'd manipulated employment records, forged references, and used his medical knowledge to gain access to vulnerable victims. Maria Santos testified about her ordeal, describing how Dr. Webb had lured her away from her nursing station with claims of a medical emergency, then drugged and abducted her. Her testimony was especially powerful because she'd survived to tell her story. "He kept talking about his research," Maria told the jury, her voice steady despite the horror she was recounting. "He said I should feel honored to be part of his work. He showed me photographs of other women he'd killed, talking about them like they were lab specimens. He had no concept that we were human beings with families who loved us." Dr. Webb's journals were read aloud in court, their clinical tone making his crimes even more chilling. The jury heard how he'd stalked Emily Brown for months, learning her routines and planning her abduction. They heard how he'd built the hidden room where he'd disposed of her body, calculating exactly how to conceal his crime. Most damning of all were the photographs Dr. Webb had taken during his crimes. The jury saw images of Emily Brown unconscious on his makeshift operating table, evidence of his complete disregard for her humanity. The defense's mental illness argument fell apart under scrutiny. Dr. Webb's ability to maintain false identities, forge employment records, and carefully plan each crime demonstrated clear awareness of right and wrong. His efforts to avoid detection showed he knew his actions were illegal. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: 4 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of kidnapping, and multiple charges related to his use of false identities and forged documents. Dr. Marcus Webb was sentenced to death, a sentence he received with the same clinical detachment he'd shown throughout his crimes. The conviction of Dr. Marcus Webb brought closure to the families of his victims, but it also raised disturbing questions about how he'd been able to continue his crimes for so long. Hospital administrators across the country were forced to examine their hiring practices, their security procedures, and their background check systems. How had a disgraced physician been able to work at multiple hospitals under false identities? St. Mary's Hospital, where Emily Brown had worked and died, underwent major reforms. The entire hiring process was overhauled, with mandatory federal background checks for all employees. Security was increased throughout the facility, with new cameras, additional guards, and electronic monitoring of all access points. "We failed Emily Brown," Hospital Administrator Dr. Patricia Wells admitted during a press conference. "Our security systems, our hiring practices, our supervision, all of it failed to protect someone who dedicated her life to caring for others. We're committed to ensuring this never happens again." The Emily Brown Memorial Fund, established after her disappearance, was expanded to provide support for families of missing persons and to fund research into hospital security. Emily's name became synonymous with the need for better protection of healthcare workers. Mark Brown eventually remarried and had children, but he never forgot Emily or the baby they'd lost. He became an advocate for missing persons' families and for hospital security reform. "Emily would want her death to mean something," Mark said during a speech at the annual memorial service held in her honor. "She'd want other families to be protected, other hospitals to be safer. If her story prevents even one person from going through what we went through, then her sacrifice wasn't in vain." Lisa Park, Emily's best friend and fellow nurse, returned to healthcare after Dr. Webb's conviction. She'd been unable to work in hospitals since Emily's disappearance, but knowing the truth about what happened finally allowed her to heal. "For 12 years, I wondered if I could have done something to prevent Emily's disappearance," Lisa said. "Now I know that what happened to her was the act of a madman who'd been planning it for months. There was nothing any of us could have done to stop him." Dr. Marcus Webb died on death row in 2023, 4 years after his conviction. He never showed remorse for his crimes, continuing to insist until the end that his work had been important medical research. But his victims' families found peace in knowing that justice had been served and that other potential victims had been protected by his capture. Emily Brown's story became a case study in hospital security and criminal psychology. Her name appeared in textbooks, training manuals, and security protocols across the healthcare industry. The maternity ward at St. Mary's Hospital was completely renovated after the discovery of Emily's remains. The wall where she'd been hidden was removed entirely, replaced with an open design that eliminated blind spots and hiding places. A memorial plaque was installed in the new nurses' station, bearing Emily's photo and the words, "In memory of Emily Brown and her unborn child. She dedicated her life to bringing new life into the world. May her sacrifice protect others who serve with the same compassion." Maria Santos, Dr. Webb's final intended victim, became a nurse practitioner specializing in trauma counseling. She worked with other crime survivors, helping them process their experiences and rebuild their lives. "Emily Brown saved my life," Maria often told her patients. Not directly, but her story led investigators to Dr. Webb before he could complete his plan for me. "I survived because she didn't, and I try to honor her memory by helping other survivors heal." The investigation into Dr. Webb's crimes led to the discovery of additional victims, women who had disappeared from hospitals in other states. Their cases never connected until FBI investigators followed the patterns Dr. Webb had documented in his journals. In total, Dr. Webb was linked to 7 murders spanning 15 years. Emily Brown had been his first victim, but she hadn't been his first target. Evidence suggested he'd been planning similar crimes even before he left St. Mary's Hospital in 2006. On December 25, 2019, exactly 12 years after Emily Brown's baby was supposed to be born, Mark Brown visited her grave with his new family. His wife Sarah and their 2 young children placed flowers on Emily's headstone while Mark told them about the woman who had been taken too soon. Emily would have loved being a mother, Mark told his children. She spent her whole career taking care of other people's babies, and she was so excited about having one of her own. The cemetery was quiet, covered in a light snow that made the headstones look peaceful and serene. Emily's grave was marked with a simple stone bearing her name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved wife, dedicated nurse, and mother of the child she never got to hold." Mark's daughter, now 4 years old, placed a small teddy bear next to the flowers. "For the baby that couldn't be born," she said solemnly, understanding as much as a young child could about loss and love and memory. As they walked back to their car, Mark's phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Williams, who had become a friend over the years since Dr. Webb's capture. The message was simple: "Thinking of you and Emily today." Detective Williams had retired 2 years earlier, but she still kept Emily's case file on her desk at home. It wasn't just because Emily had been her most challenging case. It was because Emily represented something important about justice, persistence, and the responsibility law enforcement had to families who trusted them to find answers. "Emily Brown changed how I approach every missing person case," Detective Williams often told young officers. "She taught me that someone who disappears isn't just a name in a file. They're a person with family who love them, friends who miss them, and a life that mattered. Our job isn't just to solve cases, it's to bring people home." The story of Emily Brown's disappearance and the 12-year search for answers became legendary in law enforcement circles. It was taught in police academies as an example of the importance of persistence, thorough investigation, and never giving up on victims or their families. Medical schools began including the case in their ethics curricula, using Dr. Webb's crimes as an example of how medical knowledge could be perverted by mental illness and obsession. Future doctors learned about the sacred trust between physicians and patients, and the terrible consequences when that trust was violated. In 2031, St. Mary's Hospital celebrated its centennial anniversary. The modern facility bore little resemblance to the building where Emily Brown had worked and died, but her memory remained strong throughout the institution. The Emily Brown Center for Patient Safety had been established in the hospital's newest wing, dedicated to research and training, focused on protecting healthcare workers and patients alike. The center's mission statement, displayed prominently in the lobby, read, "In memory of those we've lost, in service to those we protect, in hope for those we heal." Dr. Patricia Wells, now retired but still serving on the hospital's board of directors, attended the anniversary celebration. She had been working the night Emily disappeared, and the guilt had never entirely left her. "I think about Emily every day," Dr. Wells told the gathered crowd during her speech. "I think about the nurse who never got to hold her baby, the colleague who never got to return to work, the friend who never got to say goodbye to her family. But I also think about all the women who have been protected because of the changes we made after Emily's death. Her legacy isn't just tragedy, it's prevention." Mark Brown, now in his 50s, was invited to speak at the ceremony. He stood at the podium where hospital administrators had once promised to find his missing wife, looking out at an audience that included many people who had never known Emily personally, but who had been touched by her story. Emily Brown was a nurse, a wife, a woman who was excited about becoming a mother, Mark began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. She was also a victim of a man who saw her not as a human being, but as an object for his twisted experiments. But Emily's story didn't end with her death. It continued with the investigation that brought her killer to justice, the reforms that made hospitals safer, and the lives that were saved because people learned from what happened to her. Mark paused, looking toward the memorial plaque that bore his first wife's photo. Emily spent her career bringing new life into the world. In death, she brought new safety to the place she loved. She would have wanted to be remembered not as a victim, but as someone whose life and death made a difference. Today, I believe we can say that's exactly what happened. The audience rose in applause, not just for Mark's words, but for the woman whose memory had driven decades of positive change. After the ceremony, Mark walked through the renovated maternity ward with his current wife Sarah and their children. The space was bright, open, and safe. Everything Emily would have wanted for the place where she'd spent so many hours caring for new mothers and their babies. At the nurse's station, Mark stopped to read the memorial plaque one more time. Emily's photo showed her smiling in her purple scrubs, hand resting on her pregnant belly, full of hope for the future she would never see. "She's still helping people," Sarah said quietly, squeezing Mark's hand. "Even now, even after all these years." Mark nodded, thinking about all the families who had been spared the grief his had endured, all the potential victims who had been protected by the reforms Emily's death had sparked, all the healthcare workers who went home safely each night because of security measures implemented in her memory. Emily Brown had vanished on a cold October night in 2007, but her impact on the world had only grown stronger with time. She had wanted to be a mother, to bring new life into the world. In death, she had become something even more powerful, a guardian angel watching over every person who walked through the doors of St. Mary's Hospital. The mystery of her disappearance had been solved. Her killer had been brought to justice, and her legacy lived on in every life, protected by the changes her death had inspired. Emily Brown was finally at peace, and the world was safer because she had lived and died and been remembered.